Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's episode, I have with me Hasu, the strategic advisor to Lido and Strategy Lead at Flashbots. Hi, Hasu. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for having me. I'm a longtime fan of your podcast, so very excited to be here for the first time.
Yes, I'm really glad. I have been meaning to have you onto the show. I also am a huge fan of your podcast with John, The Uncommon Core 2.0. And in fact, I would like to do a crossover episode between our two podcasts at some point.
I think that would be a great idea.
We're going to make it happen. But for today, we have a very specific topic, a topic that I've heard a lot of people talking about on X, the crypto, sphere, and that is the Lido V3 upgrade, which is coming this summer. I have many questions about Lido V3, but before we get started with our conversation, for our listeners, I'm going to do a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. So, to get started with our conversation, before we get into some of the more controversial questions, can you give our listeners a bit of an overview of what Lido V3 is? What are its main components?
Yeah, so I assume everybody is familiar with Lido today. Lido is the biggest liquid staking pool on Ethereum, is also the biggest DeFi protocol by TVL. And today, Lido offers you a specific form of what I would call vanilla staking, right? It's basically just regular staking, spread across many different node operators in a non-custodial form. But many users, we have learned over the last I would say 2 years, want more customization than this. And to give you a few examples, some folks want to do leveraged staking. So, they want to take more risk, but also get more reward. Others, especially institutions, may have to follow know your business regulation. So they want to know who their quote unquote counterparty is. And this is a very kind of interesting rabbit hole to go down, the difference, like when is something infrastructure and when is it a counterparty, that is probably outside the scope for this conversation, but it's very interesting nonetheless. Again, others might be opinionated on the type of MEV infrastructure that is used, like different validator sidecars, the ability to bring your own clients. So if you're already a node operator or you're building some kind of structured product on top of Lido, the ability to bring your own clients into the mix, to make bespoke agreements about what fees you're charging as a node operator in Lido. That is not possible today, right? So all node operators in Lido charge the same fee. And then finally, restaking. Right? So we have seen that this is the launch of Eigenlayer and then Symbiotic has attracted a lot of stake. There's basically different things that people want to do with validators that all didn't exist back when Lido launched. So the market was from you can easily imagine there's this one size fits all staking product that everybody's going to use, turns out, the demand side of this market is actually really fragmented and people have quite bespoke ideas about what they want to do. And so Lido V3 is an upgrade to Lido where anybody can spin up your own custom staking vault. So a setup basically with a node operator and the full setup of what they want to do. And they can still mint staked ETH against that. So Lido will move from a one-size-fits-all staking to a much more customized, basically staking infrastructure that still taps into Lido's market-leading liquidity and integrations.
That sounds like it'll introduce a ton of risk to the Lido protocol. I mean, as I understand, Lido has very piecemeal started to create more features to its protocol with the creation of its DVT module. Slowly starting to add. Like you said, different parameters for the way that users can stake. Lido V3 sounds like Lido is just flinging open wide the gates for any type of customization. How does that impact, I guess, the quality of stETH as an asset? I mean, what are the risks and the kind of protections that are in place to ensure that people don't take advantage of this or create vaults that are far too risky that take away from the quality of the liquid staking token?
That makes it's a very good question. So overall, I would say there are three broad categories of risks. There's protocol complexity. There's kind of the changing risk reward profile of staked ETH, and there's any impact on the, I would say, stake distribution or like underlying kind of distribution of node operators in Lido. Like, is the introduction of V3 going to affect what has been kind of built up in terms of node operator decentralization, and like how does that affect like the slashing risk surface, for example, for Lido and by extension Ethereum? And so talking about protocol complexity, you have basically given a good overview over what is Lido's existing approach to this. It's basically move very slowly and cautiously when changing the protocol. And the very same approach is used, of course, when introducing Lido V3. So there are caps and limits everywhere. So for example, Lido V3 does not replace what is there in Lido today. So originally Lido started only with one so-called module, right? It was the curated module where basically node operators are permissioned, they are in batches voted into the node operator set. And then we added the DVT module, and we added distributed validator, not distributed validator. We did the community staking module, right? Those are the three modules now. And you had Dimitri actually on your podcast to talk about that, if I remember correctly. And with those two, also they started with very small risk limits, right? Like there was initially like 0.5% of maximum stake in the protocol allocated to this, and then went up to 1%, and it's all very gradual and controlled for the different risks, right? And so on top of that, I would say there was an interesting tweet the other day, and it basically just listed the DeFi protocols and how many audits they had gotten over the years and how much money had been spent on this. And Lido has always been very transparent about this, and Lido has the most rigorous security processes that exist, I would say, in DeFi anywhere. It's gotten the most number of audits and spent the most amount of money on this, and the security culture is, I would say, it runs very deep. So I'm not worried about it from a protocol complexity point of view. So
Primarily
really gradually
because
ramping.
It'll be very gradual, and then the kind of audits that are happening while the gradual rollout is happening, you are very confident in the amount of money being spent on.
Yeah, nothing's going to be rolled out unless it's going through multiple audits, and then when it's being rolled out, it's rolled out in a very gradual way, very controlled, with a lot of monitoring and extensive testing. And this is running alongside the existing Lido protocol, right? So we can do that. So it doesn't change, inside that risk tolerance. It doesn't change anything about any existing users of Lido. And that brings us to the second point. So how does it change the staked ETH risk and reward ratio? So when you run a staking vault, you can mint staked ETH, right? But any extra rewards that you generate from your vault are not socialized across the other holders of staked ETH, right? So when you're just a regular holder of staked ETH, then your ETH is still allocated into through the staking router to the different modules that we talked about, right? With the majority today going to the curated set, and then some going to distributed validator technology, and some going basically to community staking, right? And for the others, for what's going into the vaults, it is true that staked ETH can also be minted against that. So in theory, some amount of staked ETH is effectively backed by the modules, and some is backed by the vaults. But the modules are basically backing staked ETH at a 1-to-1 ratio, and the vaults there is a kind of collateral that remains inside the vault to compensate.
It's over
for
collateralized.
the additional risk that is introduced. It is over collateralized. So imagine that you put you put 100 ETH into a vault, then maybe you can mint 80 staked ETH against that. Whereas if you put 100 ETH into the staking router, then you can mint actually also 100 staked ETH against that, right? Because staked ETH is always benchmarked against what is like this the most secure and stable form of staking, which is still what's happening in Lido V2.
Is the over
And
collateralization amount is the over collateralization amount different per vault? So depending on the risk parameters of each vault, the collateralization ratio might be different.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how it's going to work, right? So the more risky the vault, the less collateral you will be able to mint against it. The less staked ETH you'll be able to mint against it. And this is not the only thing that actually affects how much staked ETH you can mint, which kind of brings us to the third risk, which is like, how does this change the node operator set over time? So the more any single party tries to mint, the lower their collateral ratio basically goes, right? So the less they can mint, and the bigger they are in the protocol, the less they can mint, because the more concentrated stake is with one operator, the higher the slashing risk also goes, right? So from correlation, and so that's how we're controlling for that.
Question about those 3 points, because I did not realize that, first of all, it would be a very gradual rollout. Second, that the vaults would be over collateralized. And third, that there would be a limit on, or that the more that there would be sort of like a cap for preventing the correlated slashing penalty of very large validators. And this all is news to me, because the way Lido V3 was marketed, in my understanding, was that it's Lido's big institutional push to try and capture the institutional audience. But all 3 of those things are very bad for making Lido competitive to institutions. Number one, if it's a very gradual rollout, I can't imagine that the size of institutions and the size they're bringing is something that Lido V3 would be able to support. Second, the over collateralization is kind of a little bit of a disadvantage from, say, the kind of collateral that maybe institutions could have, like a 1-to-1 ratio with some kind of an agreement with like the likes of institutions like Coinbase or whatnot. And third, of course, institutions bring with them a ton of correlated slashing risk, because if we're talking about staking ETFs and stuff, all of that ETH is just managed in a more centralized way. So how does is Lido V3 a push for institutions in your mind? Like, is it to make Lido more competitive against to capture the institutional audience?
Yeah, so I think that Lido V3 is a very important puzzle piece for winning the institutional market, but it's not the only one, right? So already today, 25% of all staked ETH in existence is used by institutions. So for many institutions, it is already like a good product. There are institutions also that have different requirements, and for them, Lido V3 will make a big difference. The ability to customize more and select who you want your node operators to be, and for the exact kind of terms of the agreement between you and the node operator and what software they run and those kind of things. So we know that matters a lot. And of course, it would be nice if you could have an entirely custom setup and you could mint staked ETH at a 1-to-1 ratio. But then, first of all, I mean, that would introduce actually new risks to existing staked ETH holders. So the risk would be socialized across them. And second, what you describe is there's nobody who could realistically provide that even, right? So, what is the better choice? Like to mint, let's say 80%, at 80% loan to value ratio, staked ETH in Lido, or to mint at 100%, but for an extremely liquid asset with tons of integrations, or to mint, let's say at 100% loan to value ratio, an asset that has zero liquidity and isn't really accepted anywhere, right? And so even when we look in the institutional offering, so what, for example, exchange traded products, like ETFs, what those issuers want is they all compete on cost, right? ETF buyers are very, very cost sensitive. And so they all compete on driving the cost as low as possible. And staking is the best way to do that. And so we know they all want to stake as much as their ETH as possible. But they also have the hard constraint of satisfying redemptions when they come in and honor them all the time. And so they need to manage basically the desire to put as much ETH into staking as possible and the desire to maximize, or even the regulatory constraint to be able to satisfy all redemptions as they come in. And staked ETH today, I would say, is the product that is best positioned to actually serve that, right? Because it does allow you to stake, but then also skip the withdrawal queue that you have in regular Ethereum and turn your staked ETH into dollars that you can then give your customers much faster.
But to a point, right? The bunker mode only has so much of ETH as buffer to allow the immediate redemptions before Lido has to kind of draw into its basically start exiting out validators. And the way that I understand for the likes of, say, like an exchange like Coinbase, they may have more in their balance sheet to kind of prioritize redemptions and perhaps like bigger flexibility because they don't have the restraints of DAO governance and the smart contract kind of protocol and rules dictating everything. Are you concerned that kind of the smart contract risk and the governance risk, the DAO risk, makes Lido less competitive against the likes of more centralized companies, especially when we're talking about institutions that do want to kind of have insurance, a way of recourse to be able to say, like, sue a company if they need to?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I wasn't talking about bunker mode or anything that requires any kind of DAO governance decisions. I'm talking simply about the fact that if you want to exit staked ETH, there's two ways. Or when you're staking, there's two ways to exit. There's the primary market, which means you give your ETH back to the beacon chain, like basically you go with like your receipt to the beacon chain and get your ETH back, right? And the second way is the secondary market, which is if that receipt is actually traded in the market and it has liquidity, then you can sell that receipt to willing buyers in the secondary market and exit that way, right? And when you can exit your staking in both the primary and the secondary market, then your available exit liquidity is simply much, much bigger. And we're always working to expand the market for staked ETH because this is an extremely, like, even when when staked ETH temporarily, for minutes or hours, like trades, let's say at a small discount or premium to ETH. This is the fact that this is even possible, like these like small market dislocations, is mostly an issue of like the market doesn't understand yet. There's not enough people like looking at this trade, for example, and understanding like how little risk it actually is, right? To kind of buy or sell stake ETH today, and then redeem it for ETH maybe in a week, right? That is not a lot of risk that you're actually incurring in that situation, or like duration risk, right? Okay, so that out of the way, I think your question was the fact that Lido is governed by a DAO, whether that is putting us at a downside or disadvantage to, yeah. Okay, so I would say no, or like my answer would be different based on the time frame that you're asking about. So I think in the past, I would say I would have cautiously said yes, because in the institutional market in particular, there was not a lot of understanding of what a DAO is, but I mean, even what a blockchain is, right? There was just not a lot of understanding of this stuff in general and how you can interface with it. That said, that I think that is changing. I mean, institutions are building up much more like comfort with using DeFi, with using Ethereum. I mean, you see all of the big players like making their own forays into DeFi and into Ethereum, launching stuff on chain, etc.
Their
So
own
that's great to
L2s.
see. At the same time, yes, launching their own layer twos, yes. At the same time, companies like Coinbase and Kraken, they had serious enforcement actions brought against them in the last few years, while Lido did not, right? So it's less the organization that matters. It is the activity also that matters. And you can argue also that institutions that have this kind of presence, that are not decentralized infrastructure, but that have like concrete kind of counterparties, they were, at the time when that mattered, they were also easier to target. So that can be a disadvantage also, as we saw. Kraken did have to exit their staking business, right? Whereas Lido did not. Like, Kraken is now back in staking, but they had to exit that business, right? And so if you're a counterparty, you're very unhappy about that, right? And so I think the biggest problem in the past used to be that it was not clear, like a DAO does not have a clear legal counterparty for those who require it. And nowadays, the way that Lido DAO is solving that and others are solving that is creating basically foundations that can act then as the legal counterparty. So we have done a lot of pioneering work together with projects like MetaLex and so on, to create these borgs. And it's basically foundations that are controlled by smart contracts on chain. Like, this way, a DAO can actually extend its control into the legal and physical world, which is very exciting. I think that we have kind of created this new level of interoperability. Right? We always talk about interoperability, between layer 2s and layer 1, and like, people care a lot about this trading, but there's many forms of interoperability that are very exciting and like very underexplored, right? The kind of the legal side of like controlling a legal entity is very exciting. Like, Flashbots is working a lot on like interoperability between Web 2 and Web 3, like controlling like Web 2 assets in a Web 3 context and so on. I'm going on a rant, but I think that is a very exciting kind of development, yeah. And the final thing that I would put out. So in Lido V2, when you wanted to stake in Lido, then automatically your stake was distributed across these. I think today it's over 500 different node operators, in fact. And what V3 fundamentally allows you to do is choose who you want your counterparty to be. and you can, with that counterparty, enter into any legal agreement that you want. So, for example, if you want staking insurance, then you can have that, right? It's just a matter of agreeing. So maybe you want to pay more in fees, but you want insurance. That's something that you can do, right? That was not possible before. And so this greater level of flexibility allows you exactly to customize the kind of level of legal risk that you want.
I mean, to the point though that some of these very more exciting features, like being able to create your own custom legal agreements with your node operator, are we talking in terms of timeline, like 5 years down the road? You mentioned that it depends on the timeline, and we also talked about how this is going to be a very gradual thing, and the vision for V3 is big. When you say things like that, I mean, I don't imagine that's going to be possible in Lido over the next year or so. Like, how long are we talking in terms of the V3 vision?
No, I mean, that is, I would definitely hope within a year. I
Oh,
think
okay.
when I say gradual rollout, I just mean like lifting, like starting with small risk limits and then like gradually lifting them over time. But institutions are also like careful and like gradual in the way that they roll out things. So I think they are very aligned with us on this approach. And you can still do a gradual rollout, let's say over a 6-month period. Or 1-year period, right? So I think we'll have to see how it goes, but the plan is definitely to have full functionality of this within a year.
Okay, that's actually a much faster timeline than I was envisioning for the V3 rollout. And it sounds as though, like you said, the lifting is of the like how much stake, what percentage of stake is going into these vaults, not necessarily a gradual rollout of features. So like features in terms of V3, you will be able to have all of the flexibility and the customizability for vaults.
Yeah. And the how much ETH is going to be allowed to go in those vaults. Just want to make it clear that if you deposit ETH with Lido, your ETH will always go into what exists today in Lido V2, right? It's always going to be staked in the vanilla setup, basically. But Lido can control how much like vault ETH can back the staked ETH by setting the collateral limits, basically. Like how much staked ETH is allowed to be minted. Like it has full control over that.
Okay. Wait, so when an institution is depositing their ETH, and has these custom agreements with, I only want to use this node operator set, and if this said node operator already has a lot of stake under its management because it's also part of like the curated set, these conversations, how would they happen? Would they happen through the DAO or the foundation?
No. So this can happen entirely between Lido. In this case, is just the infrastructure, right? So it's a platform. So imagine you're the institution. Like you can find a node operator, and you can just do this on top of Lido, and then the DAO or like whoever it designates can like evaluate what the risk limit should be on this vault. But it can also be the node operator, for example, that is bringing its clients or its prospective clients and launching this entirely with very little like interaction of the DAO itself here. Or to give yet another example, you can have someone who has neither clients nor node operators right now, but they have an idea for a structured product that they want to create, and they can launch this also, and then like backfill the other two roles, right? So in theory, you have here up to 3 different roles, right? You have the stakers who want to give their stake into the vault. You may have a curator who's basically the owner of the vault and who is making the decisions about what the setup should be. And they can also decide who the node operator should be, or the node operators. And so in this case, like different parties, like you can have the same party playing multiple roles, but you don't need to.
And all of these parties, be it the node operator or the staker or whoever it is, they the voting for each of these vaults will happen through governance though, right? As in like setting those risk parameters. Because I can imagine there might be a bottleneck, let's just say. It's like a huge popularity. There's a ton of ideas. Lots of people are proposing vaults. Is there kind of an automated process through which this will move through the queue, or no?
Well, yes. I mean, so I'm not a big believer in having a DAO vote on small decisions. DAOs should vote on big decisions. I mean, basically stuff like, well, what is the vision? What should our strategy be for this period of time? What is the budget that we want to make available for that vision, and to whom? And what should general policies be? Like policy as in, well, this is our framework for how we make repeated decisions in a particular area. And Lido has many policies that have been approved by the DAO and that are then executed by contributors or by different committees, etc. And this would be a case where there might be a risk committee, right? Like MakerDAO or Aave, etc. They all have basically like risk committees or curators, etc. And I would imagine that it will work the same way, but ultimately this committee is getting its power from the DAO, and the DAO also would set the general terms of what the committee is allowed to do, right? So, for example, they can set the risk limit on these vaults, but only up to a certain ratio, and that ratio then is a hard stop. So nobody could mint, for example, more than one staked ETH for one ETH, right? That would be something that you just is hard coded into the protocol, because
Hmm.
that literally never makes sense.
I see. I see. One last very kind of in the weeds questions, because I know I'm asking a lot, but then I want to move on because we have another section of my conversation with you that I want to talk just about Ethereum. Um, One very last question about this. You mentioned very early on in our conversation restaking. Just to confirm, does this mean that you could create a vault where restaking is natively capable through Lido?
Yes, absolutely. I think you could. Well, you just make the way that it works is you just make the vault, and then the node operator runs a native restaking pod, whatever. They have different names in different protocols, right? And then that, I mean, the withdrawal keys for that pod are basically owned by the vault, right? So the vault encumbers basically the whole operation, and then you can mint staked ETH against that. So yeah, you can totally do that.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't realize that there was that element to it, or the flexibility went so far in being able to open up some of these vaults for restaking capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing is, this is, I mean, at the end of the day, it's always still an Ethereum validator that is like
Hmm.
backing all of it, right? So
Hmm.
you always have this as your, it's always, you always, no matter what setup is being used, whether there's some amount of leverage or there is a different validator sidecar, these things do affect the risk and the reward of the staking arrangement. But at the end of the day, there's always the like 32 ETH backing each validator on the beacon chain, and like nobody, and the withdrawal keys are always with Lido, so it's always non-custodial.
I believe that is the case with restaking protocols in general, though. Just being able to use like an Ethereum validator or stake your 32 ETH and being able to um, secure kind of additional protocols from it. I believe that's also the way like Eigenlayer and Symbiotic work. I'm kind of
Yeah,
interested
I
to
mean,
see
like
how much that
non-custodial
functionality.
non-custodial staking is not our invention. Yeah, that's not what I meant.
I'm interested to see, yeah, I guess like the proliferation of that use case for Lido V3, and how might that change certain dynamics. Although I will say, restaking is still very nascent, and we haven't seen too much activity as of yet with it. Um, okay, let's start talking about Ethereum in the last couple minutes that we have on the show. Because a running theme in season 2 of Infinite Jungle is having guests on to talk about the problem that is Ethereum's continued underperformance in the markets. I've had many speakers on this, Mike Novogratz, I've had John Charb, your co host. I need to ask you, Hasu. Ethereum's dominance has been waning for over a year now. Market value is waning. What do you think is what is your opinion on what is the main reason for Ethereum's continued underperformance?
Well, I think it's always very hard to backfill a narrative into performance that you see in the market, right? Sometimes the market does what it wants, and we're just scrambling to invent a narrative. I think most of the time, that's actually what's underlying most narratives in most markets. And in crypto, this is very, very common. But if I have to guess, then I think clearly the biggest thing is the kind of resurgence of Solana, I would say. It's always easier to say, X is not working if there's like a Y that you like more or that you think is superior to that. And, in this case, that would be Solana. And if you talk about Solana, you have to talk about meme coins, because meme coins make up 80-90% of activity on Solana, even though the biggest maybe Solana advocates would like you to believe like that's not the case. But meme coin is like the single. If a company can have single client risk, then the equivalent of that is meme coins for Solana today. I'm still I like Solana, and I think it's a very interesting project that is making distinct design decisions from Ethereum. So that's always interesting to me. Like, I don't like to own two things that are too similar, but if they are different and both have a shot at being right, then to me that is worth listening, right? And I think that makes it a very good project. That said, you're already now, I think you're seeing that meme coin trading, I think, is not going to be a use case that is going to be here forever. You have seen the meme coin market cool down. I don't want to use this to say it's not going to come back, or it's not going to come back even bigger than it has. But there is a good chance that the meme coin market has topped. The wave effect from Solana going up, like Sol, the token, is now also reversing. Like, you can really see when Sol is up and people are sitting on a lot of gains, then meme coin trading is very hot. And if the opposite is the case, meme coin trading is kind of dead. For me, Solana is not betting on Solana is not without risk, because the meme coin trade is for me, that has an expiry date. And Solana, basically, a bet on Solana is a bet that they can use this time while meme coin trading is around and is very exciting and bringing in a lot of people, is whether they can retain those people with use cases that are more sustainable, and kind of use that to build out other use cases, right? That are ultimately going to have more staying power and contribute more to the network effect. And so I could totally see that being the case. I like both ETH and Solana. I own both. I think Ethereum is very much, I don't want to say oversold, because I rarely have views like that on the market, but intellectually oversold, in the sense of the criticism that's being kind of levied against it. Ethereum is in a predictably tough spot right now, because it's kind of addressed its scaling problem, but not yet kind of the UX problems that are a result of the way that it has chosen to scale. But those problems are entirely solvable. And I think you will see really big steps towards that still in 2025. I think we can, get asynchronous composability into a much better place. This year, Unichain and yesterday announced Base adopting flash blocks. So 250 millisecond block time, which is faster than Solana. And I think this is one of the theses for Ethereum, right? That you can have rollups that actually have much better user experience than you can have on a more decentralized, that you can have on a layer one, even a very fast layer one like Solana. And I think that has the chance to pull back a lot of users. Also, those rollups they can customize, and then they can differentiate much more than Solana can, which still is trying to be one network for everyone, right? And I think we have basically been in a kind of in this like trough where, if your time horizon is long, as in multiple years, it was very clear that this is a good thesis, but in practice, it had a lot of like small kind of annoying issues to work through, and I think we are in a pretty good spot to address those in 2025.
Do you have concerns about the value accrual back to Ethereum from rollups? A lot of the concerns about the rollup centric roadmap is that rollups, even in their most interoperable, wonderful UX end state, will still not give value back to ETH and can at any point use alternative DA layers, can at any point spin off into their own chain, doesn't really have to stay tethered to Ethereum in any meaningful or valuable way. Is that a concern to this future of Ethereum that you think is valid?
I don't really see it, to be honest. I mean, this is one of the aspects of the debate that I think is also where people get very hysterical for some reason. I think that if Ethereum just focuses on being a good platform for rollups, but also tries to stay relevant as a layer one and tries to build out its own network effect, then it's the combination of those things that's giving the next blockchain or the next app also an incentive to build on Ethereum and join that existing set. And as long as rollups post data to Ethereum and they settle proofs to Ethereum and they bridge through Ethereum, like that is how they communicate also to each other. Ethereum is going to capture value from that. That said, rollups should capture way more value of the economic activity they create than Ethereum. This is, for me, the definition of a platform, right? The fact that like there can be a lot built on top of you, and it's that for me is the hallmark of a platform. And I think this is the mindset that we need to adopt. Not how do we make blobs more expensive today? How do we make them much cheaper, right? When you have a very strong network effect and it's very clear that rollups can't really leave, then you can just set a fee on the blobs. Like you can just increase the fee. Like you can do that, right? For some reason, people have it in their minds that like we can't decide what kind of fee we charge from rollups, but we totally can, right? Just make the blob space valuable and the block space valuable, and then we can increase the fee later. It's pretty simple.
I agree, but the first step is making that block space valuable. And while Ethereum is the number one most like decentralized, kind of robust general purpose blockchain, I gotta say its block space value is being put up for question against the block space value of some of these other competitor chains, not just Solana, but I would even throw in like say Celestia in there. And one of the other ongoing critiques of Ethereum is its governance. So Max Resnick is another kind of proponent who proposed a fee, just a fee increase for blob-based fees. He eventually left Ethereum because his proposal wasn't put through. The Pectra upgrade has incited so much kind of disagreement among protocol developers. You see it, I see it all the time on the calls. Is governance a critical risk to the future of Ethereum? Are you concerned about the social cohesion of the Ethereum ecosystem? And do you think that is what causes Ethereum to fail?
Yeah, I think Ethereum has also a cultural problem, and in particular, I mean, there would be three things that I would like to see changed in Ethereum. One is I think more resources should be shifted, both in research and in development, from thinking about quote unquote end games to how we even get to the end game. Because there has been this, I don't know, view that Ethereum has already won. And it's just a matter of, how do we change the protocol to eliminate this 0.1% tail risk and that 0.1% tail risk. And we're kind of going in circles, talking about endgames and not talking about what do users get out of Ethereum today. What is the problem of the next user who's maybe not using Ethereum today, and how can we make those things better? And that is a big cultural problem that's been, permeating Ethereum since forever, right? Like, it's gotten better, but it needs to get better faster. I think you are seeing some of that with the EF trying to get more engaged in DeFi. There is now a call that I think is recurring that is bringing DeFi builders to the table. But DeFi builders have tried to join the table for years. Like, Uniswap got a massive shitstorm for even like having the audacity to make an EIP. Ethereum development was seen as culturally decentralized, but it was centralized as I did once a study of this, and there were only 2 EIPs that did not have a co-author who was working at the Ethereum Foundation, and they were both diffusing the Ice Age or whatever it was called, right?
Yeah.
What was it called?
The difficulty bomb.
Difficulty bomb, exactly, right? like you can't talk about I don't know. Okay, so that is a long-held pet peeve of mine, right? And I think it is Ethereum is a technocracy. Ethereum should be also a technocracy. I don't want that to change, but I want the set of stakeholders that is being pulled by the technocrats. I want that to expand and to change, and they are very open to that. And I think those changes are happening, right? I think there are still a bunch of initiatives that I would put firmly in the quote unquote endgame, like addressing any kind of 0.1% endgame risks. And I would stop all of those things immediately, pretty much, and allocate those resources elsewhere. Right? You have to stop something. You can't just say, well, let's do more of everything, right? And I think this is the part where I would probably cut a lot of resources.
Do you think the Ethereum Foundation specifically should spin out more of its developers and researchers and mindshare?
No, I think that the Ethereum Foundation is effective in certain areas. And I think that making Ethereum development more decentralized is not going to address the problem. I think a lot of the problem comes from it being decentralized, which is kind of getting me to my next point. I think development can be sped up. We can fork more often. The forks can be more thematic. And most of all, we can have fewer client teams. I think, I understand this is controversial, and I'm a big believer in client diversity as well. So I don't want to get on an airplane that doesn't have that doesn't have client diversity in the sense of if one machine fails, then there's no fallback, right? There should be at least 3 different ones that where two, if two say something, then that's seen as truth, right? But this is a good example, because when you have in an airplane, when you have 2 systems disagree, that's useless, right? If you have 3, that's great, but if you have 4, that's already useless, and 5 plus, let's not talk about that. And in Ethereum, it has been the case for a very long time that pretty much every client team has a lot of saying power over what goes into the next fork. I wouldn't say they had an explicit veto right, but it was pretty much a soft veto right. Also, there is a phenomenon where even if every team tries its best and they all agree on what should be shipped, the fact that you are shipping across 7, 8 different clients, and they all run, they run a week late, they run 1 week late here and 1 week late there, and it's every time a different client, but you have different points in the path to shipping every update, right? And they all need to catch up to each other maybe 2, 3, 4 times for each update. And every time, you have different teams, but you have some teams who are late, or more clients, also more bugs in the consensus. And so I think there is a sweet spot to how many clients you should have. And I think right now we are way past that. Like we are slowing down the governance by having too many clients, and we're slowing down the development. And I think both of those are not great. Of course, making a client is permissionless in the sense, well, anybody can do it. But like I've heard that argument, but like making a client is also not profitable, so they all, are funded by donations. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you stop the funding, you stop the clients. And so I think those resources can be spent better elsewhere. And I think also those folks who work on it, who are incredibly talented, there is a lot of demand for that talent. So I think really it's a win-win-win for Ethereum. Like faster development, faster governance, money saved, and like a lot of key talent that's basically freed up to work on other like really key priorities.
That's fair. One quick pushback to this. Wait, do you have a third point of what needs to change?
I do.
Okay. Well, one
I
question
do,
to the
but go
client
ahead.
team. Client teams, there's 10 main ones. I agree, that's a lot. But what people don't understand is that it's not 10 duplicate clients, right? It's 5 consensus layer clients and 5 execution layer clients. And if you really drill down into these, it's actually, in terms of the activity and their distribution, there's really only 2 or 3 main ones per. Do you think that's even too much, like having 2 or 3 main ones per protocol? As in, the complexity of Ethereum's code base is such that it requires this additional overhead, like the duplication. There can't be just one client. You can't have an execution layer client and a consensus layer, or you can't have like one that merges the two. You need all these, like, you need to run 2 like clients, and then the engine API software, and then like the MEV boost software. So the code base of Ethereum is such that it makes it almost like very, very difficult to move faster or to have reduction in in the people that's maintaining the software. It's just too big of a beast.
Yeah, I mean, I would acknowledge that I'm not, an engineering manager or anything like that, right? I think I've chatted a little bit like with folks like Georgios and like other people who are thinking about how to make Ethereum development faster, and this thing is coming up a lot, I would say. And I think there is some acknowledgement that it's at least part of the problem. I don't know what the solution is, but I mean, this seems like a lever that I would say is probably part of it.
Fair.
For me, the final cultural shift that I would love to see is to move to development by goals and constraints, not features. And so what I mean by that, goals is what do we want to have changed about the protocol, but in terms of outcomes, right? Like user outcomes. So we want the supply of X to increase. We want the block time to decrease. We want the verification cost to decrease. We want whatever, right? Like any goal that you like, and then the constraints that this goal must satisfy. So for example, when I learned last year that there wasn't a single person in the Ethereum ecosystem that knew what happens if the gas limit is increased by 50% or even like 25%. No one had ever tested this or even thought about it theoretically. This is a huge problem, right?
Right.
Like we need to understand, well, what are kind of, the tolerances of the software that we are developing. Also, what is, maybe the number of solo validators that we want, or like the hardware requirements that we want to put on them, and bandwidth requirements. Like we need to understand all of those things. And reasonable people can disagree on what they should be, but you still need to come to some kind of consensus about what those things should be, both the goals and the constraints, because otherwise you will end up with the world that we're in right now, which is we talk about features, but we don't have an agreement on what the goals and constraints would be. And so, deciding which feature should go into the next fork is basically a popularity contest. Like there's a lot of politics and frankly, bargaining involved here, and this is not how you run an effective protocol. Like, it would be, I don't know what it would look like, but I think it would be good if there was more of this like pre-consensus on what do we want to achieve and what does the solution have to look like, and then different options can be compared, or you can have a team that's like running with this idea in a certain direction. And I think this would overall, this would speed up development a lot, make it kind of more thematic and like more impactful, instead of this kind of piecemeal, like very political update process that we have right now. And so surely there's, I think, a lot of things that could be changed about Ethereum, but if it was only 3, then that would probably be my top 3.
Yeah. I like the idea of having a pre-consensus process for goals, because the way that the EIP process is before every upgrade happens, all the client teams give their suggestions of like, oh, we took a review of every single code change that was proposed and we like these top 5. And another client team will be like, we like these top 3. And what you're saying is that instead of starting the governance process there of reviewing EIPs, start it even earlier, where you don't jump straight into reviewing the EIPs, but you first get consensus on what the goal is for this upgrade.
Yeah. And this solves this other problem almost by accident, which is that Ethereum doesn't have a North Star, right? That it doesn't really, we don't really know what its goal is and what steps it is taking there. Because it really, if you ask, 5 different people, even like really top people working on the protocol, you will get 5 different answers about what the goal is and what we should prioritize. And I think there must be some process by which those people talk to each other. And it cannot really be this current thing, because right now we're talking about goals and constraints implicitly, right? Because I say I favor this EIP and you say, but I favor that EIP, and really they have not that much in common with each other, right? And so we're always trying to decipher what we think about that direction of the protocol without ever explicitly talking about it.
Yeah. I can't imagine, though, that the process of figuring out the goals will be any less political than the process of figuring out the code changes. I guess to some extent, they really are merged. For Fusaka, for example, all core developers are aligned about PeerDAS as as the main code change going into Fusaka. And that's not really just about PeerDAS, right? It just shows that their priority is servicing and catering to Ethereum's rollup centric roadmap, to do everything, to kind of focus their main efforts on that, and everything else is kind of secondary. So yeah, I hear you that we should make it more explicit, though, because there's benefit in that kind of clarity, especially when it comes to people understanding what Ethereum's North Star is.
Yeah, and I'm sure if we ran a process like that, then we would agree that servicing rollups is the number one priority, and the number one way we do that is making blobs as cheap as possible, for example, right?
Yes.
Another might be specific interoperability initiatives that are not really that related to the protocol. It's more standardization work and coordination work with wallets in particular, and kind of, maybe like a token standard for interoperability and a token standard for solvers and like those kind of things, right? But it is important also. Right now, what you also have as a result of this is really EIP changes, or protocol changes, and non-protocol changes are treated very much on different levels, right? Like protocol changes are this almost like important gold standard, and then the not protocol things, those are seen as not that important, not that prestigious. But that's totally not true. Like very often the most important and most prestigious projects are the like non-protocol or the one that require very little protocol change, or maybe they are like on layer 2 or something, right? Like all of those matter. And having a process by which we say, here's what we are doing for rollups through blob space, here's what we're doing through interoperability, etc. Like we can list out those things, and you can say, I'm working on a real like top priority for the Ethereum protocol, without having kind of this nimbus of being like a core developer or something like that, right? So you even actively like expand the club of like what it means to do like really important work for Ethereum that is, in some ways maybe like a little bit gate kept today.
Yeah, 100%. I do agree. Non-protocol changes are very underrated. And to the extent that Ethereum is focusing on a roll-up centric roadmap, the kind of efforts that's happening on the layer twos is so pivotal to Ethereum's future. But yeah, it doesn't get as much credit or as much prestige as being a core developer, quote unquote. Um, my biggest concern is actually that Ethereum upgrades too fast. That in the midst of this concern about Ethereum's underperformance, lack of North Star, community division, I was very nervous about what happened on Haleshi. Developers have never broken a testnet before. They did. Geth had a hot fix that could have caused very awful ramifications to Ethereum mainnet just a couple months ago. Developers narrowly missed the 50% or the doubling of the block gas limit. They didn't even realize that the consensus layer could not handle double the block gas, so they had to signal to the community that they should stop. I think these are symptoms that developers are going to break things and break things in a very kind of
Yes.
catastrophic way.
Well, Ethereum is not culturally necessarily set up to move faster, right? So it's
Yeah.
a slower process. This is why I really put like shift more resources from like endgame thinking to like next 2 years thinking, right? Like the fact that we don't know, what happens if we increase the gas limit by 50%, for example, that is a big problem, right? We need that, all of that legwork must be done long before, right? And so I think this is a good example. I think I can see your argument. I mean, it's also very timely. The fact that like Haleshi broke like that, right? It's I don't know if there was an element of pressure like that, but if I was like opposed to Ethereum moving faster, I certainly like that. Haleshi broke, like not to kind of imply any like malintent, but there is like coincidences happen. So
It's not a
um,
coincidence, Hasu.
well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. Like we don't know, right? So yeah, it is a warning sign that at least we need to change the culture, like around moving faster, right? Like you can't just move faster and change nothing else, right? You need to. Well, I think if you reduce the number of clients, that certainly removes a lot of surface for things breaking. If you think more ahead, that removes a lot of things from breaking. If you bundle, if you make the forks like thematic, I think that also does a ton for making sure you upgrade more safely, because you scope, you basically create these sandboxes inside the protocol for like, we're changing this thing, but we're leaving the other 90% untouched, right? And there's always, kind of cross effects between things, but they are much more predictable when you say we're only changing one area, right? Or we're changing only two areas. And so I think like those effects are real, right? But it needs to come with a more like holistic rethinking of how we develop Ethereum.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Hasu, for the conversation and for the time. I've taken, honestly, far too much of your time. I think this was the longest guest episode I've ever recorded on the Infinite Jungle series for both seasons.
I want you. I want you that I can't be short.
You did. You did warn me before this episode. But I really do appreciate the insights, and I'm really glad that we had this conversation. And I hope that I'll have you back on the show again. Yeah. Anything else though that you wanted to cover on that we didn't cover before we end the episode?
No, you've been very great with your time, and this has been a very fun conversation, and I hope to be back. Yeah, I'm a longtime fan of the show, and so it was a really nice experience. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. And thank you to all of our listeners who was listening to this episode of The Infinite Jungle. We hope that you learned something new about Ethereum, and I hope that you'll come back again to listen to new episodes of the Infinite Jungle podcast. I am signing off from Los Angeles, actually, this week, from LA, from the West Coast. Hasu, where are you signing off from?
Germany.
Oh, okay. We are signing off again, another guest episode, an international guest episode from the US and Germany. In your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.